I'm Bob Weiss. I'm in the old Memorial Cemetery, and I'm here with
Mickey Ketting.
And what can you tell us today?
Well, I'm talking about the cemetery and the history of the cemetery. This cemetery was given as a land grant from the King of Spain when this territory belonged to Spain, and it was given to the Roman Catholic citizens of St. Genevieve, which comes into play in the late 1990s of who owns the cemetery. When you have to go all the way back to that land grant. It was used as a cemetery from 1787 until 1882. By 1882, every time they'd open a grave, they would find bones, and they were afraid of releasing cholera into the atmosphere. They didn't know how germs acted at the time, and so they were very afraid of that, and they decided to close the cemetery. Plus, they couldn't find a spot that didn't have a body in it, and so they closed the cemetery. The graves were not being made anymore except for Odile Valet, and she gave the land for the new city cemetery so that she could be, whenever she died, she could be buried here. She's the last person to be buried in the cemetery. And by 1882 they closed it. By 1905 it was in deplorable condition, and people were writing letters to the editor. They were complaining about it. There was an effort at the time to do a little bit of cleaning up. They did dig up Senator Lewis Lynn, who was the model senator from the state of Missouri, and they moved him out to the new cemetery. In 1925, there was another effort to get it restored, and in 1937, they had a WPA work project here and put a fence around the cemetery, and they also instituted a cemetery tax. And that cemetery tax paid for the upkeep of this cemetery, which amounts to just mowing it, and upkeep on the new cemetery. So if you live in St. Genevieve, you've been paying this cemetery tax your whole tax-paying life, if you will.
Right.
But in 1937, when they were doing all of this, as a show that they wanted to make this better, they dug Senator Lynn back up again. He died in the 1840s, and they brought him out here to reinter him here. And he had a lead coffin, and there was a little door over a window, and it came loose, just happened to come loose, and you could see in and see the very perfectly mummified remains of Senator Lewis Lynn. So they went to school, and they gathered all of the school children and brought them through the cemetery so that they could all say that they had seen Senator Lynn. And for the first 5 years that I've been started doing this, there was always somebody in the group that said, I saw him, I saw him. It was amazing how many people remembered that from their school days, that they saw Senator Lynn. So he's still here. He's at the top of the hill, and he is still here with us, and I hope will stay with us from now on and not go traveling.
He's done enough trips across town.
He has, back and forth and back and forth. So we hope he's finished, you know.
So when you say you have the dead walk in town, that's almost true.
Almost, you know. It's enough that we have the spirits here tonight. You know, people come by and they think, what's going on in the cemetery? But it is the spirits re-meeting here again and telling their stories to the people. After 1937, in the 1960s, there was a little effort being done, and in the 1990s, there was the beginning of the efforts that's still going on today. And the Foundation for the Restoration took on the job of doing the restoration work, but we ran into the problem, who owns the cemetery? So with a lot of research, they found this Roman Catholic citizens, which isn't the parish, it isn't the archdiocese, it's strictly the Roman Catholic citizens. So members of the parish had to sign quitclaim deeds. The parish and the archdiocese signed quitclaim deeds, and it is now owned by the city of St. Genevieve. with the understanding that the foundation would continue the grant process in the restoration efforts. So we had a $300,000 Save Our American Treasures grant, about 4 or 5 years ago. We completed that, and we have been steadily raising money, and this year we were able to restore another 20 stones, and we're doing recordation so that we will know more of the stories of the people that are buried here and be able to tell the stories of everyone that is here.
If people want to donate to the cemetery, how would they go about doing that?
They can contact the foundation, and the telephone number is 573-883-9622. They can call me. It's 573-883-5850. Or you can mail it to the Foundation for the Restoration of St. Genevieve, P.O. Box 88. So we'd be happy for any donations, because it's a big effort, and it's amazing how expensive every little thing is. And even the things that aren't so expensive add up very quickly, very quickly. So.
All right. Well, I guess it's time. Let's go visit some spirits.
Go right ahead and meet all the spirits.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Hi, and I'm here today with
Charles Rosier.
And what can you tell us today?
I represent the what we refer to as the people, the tribal people that are buried down through this draw. They're at random. There's no records of any, but we have various tribes. There are Shawnee buried here, and of course Osage and Piankashaw, and many different tribes that were in this area from time to time. And as an Indian, that's my story.
All right. Were the tribes and the settlers here, were they on good terms in general?
Oh, generally speaking, there was never a problem here. There was a time when Piankashaw, or the Shawnee, I'm not completely sure which, lived south of town, and there was a loud uprising one night, and they called the militia thinking that there was going to be a raid, and in reality they were having a party.
It's kind of hard to tell the difference, right?
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming.
And you are?
Good evening. My name is Marie Villars. I was born in 1790 and died in 1856 at the age of 56. I chose to be single. I never married. My parents were Marie Louise Valet, and my father was Louis Dubrel de Villars. They were famous citizens mainly because their families were very important in the militia, being both commandants and lieutenants. I had a brother and 3 sisters. My brother Joseph, he married Eleonora St. Jim Beauvais. She was the niece of a wealthy merchant from Kaskaskia. My second sister was Maria. Maria married Philip de Lassus. My sister Euphosine, also known as Eugenia, she married John Price. John Price was a wealthy Kentuckian, and he came here and built the old brick, which still stands today. And my third sister, Marcelite, married Joseph Herditch. Joseph Herditch, as you well know, there's a bed and breakfast in town. But Joseph was very well known because he started the School of the Asylum. And back in those days, asylum was not the kind of asylum we know today. And it was a very prominent school. It was located somewhere on the river Oxfoss, but we don't know where. And he later became the first warden of the first Masonic Lodge west of the Mississippi, also known as Louisiana No. 9, located where the Green Tree Tavern is today. So my family was famous, and here I lie.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I am in full mourning because I survived the cholera outbreak.
One of the few.
One of the few.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jean-Marie Pepin de la Chance.
And what can you tell me about your story?
I was born in Canada, Quebec, near Quebec City in 1737. I was the third of 7 children. My great-grandfather, Antoine, migrated from Normandy in France to Quebec in 1651. It seems that after Champlain settled Quebec, King Louis XV deeded a lot of land in Canada to his relatives. And they needed somebody to come over here and work that land or clear the lands. So they asked for some volunteers to come over and do this, and my ancestor Antoine was a volunteer. The deal was he was to work for the king for 3 years, and then he was to get his own land in Canada, which he did. He got 200 arpents of land adjacent to Quebec City after he worked for them for 3 years. And he cleared his land, or part of it anyway, and he went to farming like all the rest of the French settlers did up there. He was only 19 years old then, well, about 20 years old then. But they grew up fast back in those days, and he put a crop out, and he cleared, I should say most of his land anyway, for cropland, and he had some woods on it. And he built himself a cabin on it, and he was doing pretty well for himself for a couple of years. But they just had one big problem. There was no women up there. And here he was, 21, 22 years old, and he needed a mate. There was a lot of Iroquois Indians around there, but they wouldn't have made very good wives for these French settlers because they were kind of teed off because they were squatting on their land anyway. So old King Louis XV saw their plight, and he put out a call for some young ladies to come over as possible wives for these Frenchmen. And quite a number of ladies answered the call. There were some provisions. They had to be, I think, no more than 25, I think, and they had to be really a good, healthy condition because they were going to some pretty harsh country up here in Canada. So anyway, quite a number answered the call, and the first group arrived in Canada in 1659. And I don't think Antoine took too much time in making a selection because he married Marie Tess within 3 months. So I guess he was pretty lonesome. But they were pretty compatible because they had 12 children together they had. They moved out in the island, out on his little land out there, and they started having children right away, so he had to enlarge his house and put more crops out, I guess, to feed them all. And they did really well there for about 3 years. But then the Iroquois wouldn't let them alone. They started harassing them and threatening them and burning their crops and stuff like that. And it was really a scary time for them. Anyway, some of the early other settlers, there was several groups, moved out in the Isle of Orleans in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. And the Iroquois didn't bother them out there. So old Antoine, he decided to give up everything he had, which he worked so hard for, and move out on the island with the rest of them. And he acquired some land out there and started all over again. So, my father was John Joseph Pepin, and old Antoine was he was Antoine's grandson. And we lived in the village of St. John, which is there's 3 villages out there on the island. And he raised his large family over in the village of St. John. But like I said, I had 11 in our family, and our house getting kind of crowded with 10 brothers and sisters. So my sister Christine and I decided to come down here to the Illinois country, as it was called back then. And we had a couple of cousins who came down here. They sent back word how nice it was here. The growing season was longer and warmer, and all kind of good stuff they sent back about the area down here. So my sister Christine and I decided to make the trip, and it was quite a trip. We came down the St. Lawrence River to Lake Ontario, then to Lake Erie, up the Maumee River to the headwaters of the Wabash, and down the Wabash to the Ohio, and down the Ohio to the Mississippi, and up the Mississippi to Kaskaskia, and then across the river to St. Genevieve. We left up there in the spring of 1765 and got down here in the late summer. Then I met with some of my cousins down here. We had 2 or 3 of them down here, and one of them had a mill. I went to work for him for a little while, and some other odd jobs. I didn't have anything permanent. But I did make a few trips back to St. Louis. St. Louis was just getting a good start then. They just started about 1765, St. Louis did. And I made a few trips across the river to Kaskaskia for my cousin, the mill. But my sister Christine, on one of my trips to St. Louis, she was with me, and she married Charles Bissett up there, and they raised her back. She stayed up there then. They raised a large family up in St. Louis, her and Charlie. And on one of my trips back to St. Genevieve, I met Catherine Lalamander, and I courted her, and We were married in the old town in 1779. And I built a cabin for her along the river, like all the rest of them did. A big long string right along the riverbank, which was a mistake, I guess. And we had our first child there in 1780. And I tried to scratch out a living farming, but I'm not a farmer. I'm a stonemason by trade, and there was no stone houses being built in St. Genevieve, but there was some starting to be built in St. Louis. So I tried to talk my wife into going to St. Louis. She didn't want to because her family was here, her mother was here, and she was getting friends were here, but finally I talked her into it. I said, we can either starve here or we can go up there and I can use my trade to make a living for the family, because we was getting a few kids there. Anyway, we went up there then, and we had 5 more children in St. Louis. And before moving back to St. Genevieve in 1792, because she just didn't like it up there. She wanted to move back down here again with her mother and her family and her friends. So in 1792, we moved back. But when we were gone, we had heard about the big flood they had down here in 1785, which wiped out our cabin, wiped out the whole town. That's when they all moved up here where we are today. And so when we came back, we had to move here then. And when we did come back, well, this was controlled by Spain then. After the French and Indian War, all the French lands west of the Mississippi was given to Spain. So I was lucky enough to get a Spanish land grant. And it ran along the river, the edge of my little home here, along the cemetery here. It was 1 arpent wide from the river as far away as you wanted to go. So I got that, and I built a 2-story log house about 2 blocks down the street down here. And well, went back to farming again because there's still no stone houses being built here, or stone buildings. But this time I had a little help. My cousins helped me, and my oldest son now, I think he was 13 now, and he was able to help me some. So we were able to make it now. And so we started our last child, Gervais, was born here in 1793. And so they all grew up together here, and they found wives and husbands of their own, and they scattered in all directions. And Catherine and I grew old together, and we ended up in this beautiful place here.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hi, and you are?
I am Marie Theresa St Jim Gibord, and I was born in 1808 here in St. Genevieve. But my family this is my father, Bartholomew St. Jim. On the other side is my mother, Marie Rosier St. Jim. They were from Kaskaskia, but they came here before I was born. So many of the French came from Kaskaskia because at that time it was under English rule and the French hated the English. So they jumped river and came and settled in this area. When I was 18 years old, I married Eugene Jacques Pierre Gibord. He was from a prominent family here in St. Genevieve. In fact, his family home was the Gibord Tour House on 3rd and Merchant Street. But we moved to Old Mines, and that's where our first child was born. And we moved back here because his mother had died. So he bought his brothers out, and we lived in the Gibord house down here. And we had, all in all, we had 13 children. But, well, there was no TV or football, so I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, but 8 of them died before I did. 3 of them died in infancy. So back then, children died because they didn't know anything about sanitation or infection or child care. And then in 1858, then I died. And I don't know what I died for. It's been so long ago, I don't remember. And Eugene is buried here somewhere. I don't know where. He lived 20 years after I died. He probably remarried, don't want me to know it, so that's my story.
He's here somewhere.
He's somewhere. I'm going to hunt him up someday.
There you go. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
Hi, and I'm here with
Genevieve Schwab. I am a 30-year-old school teacher here in St. Genevieve, and at the age of 30, I died during the cholera epidemic of 1854. At 30 years of age, I'm a woman who is well past my prime because 39 was the life expectancy of a woman in Missouri at that time. I taught in a one-room schoolhouse, and I was not married. I was not allowed to be married and teach school in Missouri at that time. I lived with the families who sent their children to the school. The more children you had, the longer I stayed at your house. Cholera was a disease that probably 1/4 of the city of St. Genevieve contracted and died during that time, and most people were getting their water from the Gabourey Creek and carrying it in an oaken bucket. And it sat in the kitchen in that wooden bucket, and everyone was drinking from the same dipper. It was a disease that took people quickly, approximately 3 days, and it was not a disease that lingered very long. So 30 years of age, Genevieve Schwab, and they're not exactly sure where in the cemetery she's buried.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank
your time.
you.
Hi, and I'm here with.
Joshualloway.
And what can you tell me about your story?
I am representing Berthold Kistner, but my daughter is buried here in this cemetery. Her grave was lost because it was either marked by a wooden or an iron cross, and most likely wooden since I was a carpenter. I myself was born in 1845. I emigrated over here in 1867 from Germany to New York. From New York, I migrated to St. Genevieve, and it was here that I met my wife. My wife then, Ida Klein, was a widow of John Hart and had a daughter, Lena, at the age of 2 or 3. In the same year I married Ida, and adopted Lena as my own. 4 or 5 years later, Lena started complaining of her throat hurting. She started losing appetite. And finally in 1873, at the age of 8, she died, and we buried her in the cemetery. In 1885, my wife and I moved to St. Louis, and we are both currently buried in Saints Peter and Paul Cemetery in St. Louis.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, and I'm here with.
I'm the spirit of Odile Valet, and I'm buried right here, right next to on the other side of my husband right here, who is Felix Valet. And Felix was a very important man here in town. He was a very distinguished citizen. And we lived just down Merchant Street here in a big stone house that today is known as the Felix Valet State Historic Site. And we bought that house in 1824. And we ran a business that was called Menard and Valet Trading Firm, and the other half of the house was our residence. And we ran a store there until about mid-1840s. And after that time, about that time, his partner Pierre Menard died, and we decided to go out of the mercantile business at that time. So we remodeled the house to be strictly a residence. Felix and I had one son, and he's buried here. In fact, the whole Valet family is here. My mother and father-in-law are there. My brother-in-law is here, my son. We only had one child, Louis, and unfortunately he died as a young man of 33. And he didn't marry, so he left us with no heirs, no grandchildren. So, we had, my husband was the youngest of 4 brothers, so he had they also all had lots of children, so we had lots of nieces and nephews. When Felix lived to be 77, I was almost 90 years old when I passed away, so he died before I did and was buried here. And then a few years later, they closed this cemetery because it was full, and the city said it was a health hazard. But I wanted to be buried next to Felix. So I made the city an offer they couldn't refuse. I offered them a strip of land on the outskirts of town, which is where your new cemetery is, in lieu that I could be buried here. So the city agreed, and I was the last burial here in this old cemetery.
So you're one of the original ones that said, I'll make you an offer that you can't refuse.
I really was the first, the first one of those, right.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Hi, and I'm here with.
Barbara Okenfuss. I am a German here in the cemetery. St. Genevieve was settled by the French, but the Germans came by the hundreds in the 1830s, 1840s. I came with my parents in 1843, met my husband here. He came with his parents. We had 11 children. 4 of them are buried in the cemetery, but I don't know where. My babies were buried with wooden crosses, and the wooden crosses have rotted away. Over 3,000 people were buried in this cemetery, most of them with wooden crosses, so many of the graves are unknown. I lived to be 91. I'm buried in the cemetery across town. Some of my children who did make it to adulthood were prominent businessmen here in town. In fact, one of them was the tinsmith who put the tin roofs on many of the buildings in town. And another one was a carpenter who built the coffins that are buried here in the cemetery. Well, one of the reasons the Germans came to Missouri was because a man named Duden wrote a book in the 1820s describing Missouri as paradise, the perfect place for Germans to move to, because the rolling hills and the river was just like back at home. And there was some political and economic problems at the time in Germany, so hundreds of Germans came up through New Orleans. Many stopped here in St. Genevieve, others went on to Herman and other locations. So what started as a French community ended up a German town.
All right, well, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Hi, and I'm here with...
I am John Henderson. I am one of the 2 Scots that are buried here in the Memorial Cemetery. I was born in 1803. I came to the United States around the Pennsylvania area at the time when they were recruiting Scotsmen to fight against the Indian Rebellion that was going on at that time. I proved, however, that I wasn't much of a fighter. I was, I don't know if you can say more of a lover, but anyway, I was more of a peacekeeping guy and wanted to be a shopkeeper. And so as that conflict wore down, I eventually wound my way west, found myself in St. Genevieve, fell in love with the town, opened up a shop, and became fairly successful at it. Decided that this is where I was going to raise my family and everything. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to marry or start a family because I only lasted 38 years. I caught cholera in 1841, and that's when I died from that. The inscription, you can't hardly see, it says, "Sweet, sweet, be thou asleep in the bosom of earth, in the grave far away from the home of thy birth. Thou hast finished the race, thou hast reached the far goal. Peace, peace to thine ashes, and rest to thy soul." The stone was actually constructed for me by my brothers. The inscription on the back says it's from Gordon and Charles Henderson, brothers to the deceased, as a slight testimonial of their affection for the departed. And when we are up this close, it looks like the stone has seen some deterioration with the top being flat. But as you back up away from it, you can see that it's an obelisk, and it's still in perfect shape. For 1841, it's been here a long time.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.